The words stopped my heart before I even had time to laugh them off. A woman I had never met looked me straight in the eyes across a crowded hospital waiting room, held out a folded envelope with trembling hands, and asked me to marry her for 6 months. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. I almost stood up and walked away forever, convinced I was being pulled into a scam or an impossible mistake. Then she whispered the reason, and in that single moment, everything I believed about love, sacrifice, and second chances changed forever. If you believe kindness can change lives, forgiveness can heal broken hearts, and hope is worth fighting for, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community. Rowan Mercer had built his life around avoiding emotional risks. At 35, he repaired historic homes throughout a quiet coastal town, preferring cracked wooden beams to complicated relationships. Houses made sense because every problem had a cause, every broken wall had a solution, and every damaged foundation could be strengthened with enough patience. People were different. Years earlier, he had watched his engagement collapse after discovering the woman he planned to marry had only stayed because of financial security. Since then, he trusted measurements more than promises and silence more than affection. That ordinary afternoon, Rowan had visited the hospital to check on an elderly neighbor recovering from surgery. The visit had lasted only 20 minutes, yet as he stepped into the bright waiting area, someone quietly spoke his name. He turned, confused, because he could not remember ever seeing the woman standing there. She wore simple clothes, carried a worn leather bag, and looked exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep could ever fix. Her pale green eyes held determination, but beneath it rested unmistakable fear. She introduced herself as Clara Whitmore and apologized for approaching a complete stranger. She explained that she had spent weeks searching for someone with a reputation for honesty, compassion, and stability. Rowan almost smiled at the absurdity. He insisted she had the wrong person. She shook her head gently and handed him the envelope. Inside were legal papers, medical documents, and a handwritten letter. Before he could finish reading, she asked him to marry her for 6 months. Everything inside Rowan resisted the idea. He prepared to refuse immediately. Nothing about the situation made sense. Temporary marriages belonged in movies, not real life. Then he continued reading. The papers revealed that Clara's 12-year-old niece, Hazel, had been battling a severe heart condition for years after losing both parents in a devastating highway accident. Clara had become the girl's legal guardian, sacrificing her career, her savings, and nearly every dream she once carried. The child's grandfather had left behind a family trust intended to pay for advanced treatment, education, and lifelong care. However, the outdated legal conditions required Hazel to be raised in what the grandfather had called a stable two-parent household before the trust could be released. Clara had spent months fighting the condition in court, but every appeal moved painfully slowly while Hazel's health steadily declined. The treatment she desperately needed could not wait another year. Rowan stared at the papers, unable to process the cruel irony. Clara explained that she had exhausted every legal option. She refused to deceive anyone permanently, refused to manipulate wealthy relatives for money, and refused to abandon Hazel's future. She had simply reached the end of every road she could find. She admitted she had no right to ask such an enormous favor from anyone, especially a stranger. She promised there would be no romantic expectations, no hidden motives, and a legally binding agreement protecting them both. After 6 months, they would quietly end the marriage once the trust released the funds and Hazel received treatment. Rowan looked toward the children's wing visible through the hospital windows. Bright drawings covered the glass. Small faces smiled despite enormous battles. Suddenly the request no longer sounded ridiculous. It sounded heartbreaking. Even so, fear lingered. He remembered the betrayal that had left invisible scars years before. He wondered whether kindness could once again become the doorway to disappointment. Before answering, Rowan asked to meet Hazel. The little girl greeted him with an enormous smile that somehow survived endless hospital visits. She apologized because she could not shake his hand firmly due to weakness and instead proudly showed him the sketchbook where she drew houses she hoped to live in one day. Every page contained sunlight pouring through wide windows. Every drawing included flowers. Every home looked safe. Rowan quietly realized she had been drawing the kind of future she wasn't certain she would live long enough to see. By the time he left the hospital that afternoon, the decision had already formed inside him. 6 days later, under bright blue skies in a small courthouse surrounded by blooming gardens, Rowan and Clara signed the marriage certificate. There were no grand celebrations, no dramatic kisses, and no fairy tale promises. Only two adults making an impossible choice for the sake of a child who deserved another chance at life. The arrangement attracted immediate suspicion. Neighbors whispered. Co-workers questioned Rowan's judgment. Distant relatives accused Clara of manipulation without ever asking about Hazel. Every cruel rumor became another weight they quietly carried. Instead of defending themselves to everyone, they poured their energy into creating stability for Hazel. Rowan converted the spare bedroom in his modest home into a cheerful space filled with bookshelves, sunlight, and a reading corner beside the window. Clara organized medications, school lessons, and therapy appointments with tireless devotion. Together they established routines that slowly replaced fear with comfort. For the first time in years, Rowan found himself laughing during breakfast because Hazel insisted pancakes tasted better when cooked into funny shapes. Clara smiled more often. The house no longer echoed with loneliness. As weeks passed, the fake marriage became surprisingly real in ways neither of them expected. Not because romance suddenly appeared, but because trust quietly grew. Rowan noticed Clara skipping meals whenever medical bills increased. Without mentioning it, he began preparing lunches for both of them before work. Clara discovered Rowan secretly repairing neighbors' homes at no charge whenever elderly residents could not afford maintenance. She never praised him loudly. Instead, she simply started leaving fresh coffee in his workshop every morning. Neither gesture demanded recognition. Both spoke volumes. The legal investigation into the trust required regular home visits. Social workers observed how Hazel interacted with them. They expected rehearsed performances but instead found ordinary family moments. Rowan helping with homework. Clara cheering during physical therapy. All three planting flowers in the front yard beneath warm afternoon sunshine. One social worker later admitted she had rarely seen a child laugh so freely while facing such difficult circumstances. Months moved quickly, and Hazel's health finally improved enough for surgeons to schedule the life-saving procedure once the trust officially released its funds. Then another obstacle appeared. A distant relative challenged the marriage, claiming it existed solely to access the inheritance. Court hearings threatened to delay everything once again. Rowan could have walked away. The 6-month agreement protected him completely. Instead, he stood before the judge and accepted every difficult question without anger. He admitted the marriage had begun as an agreement. He refused to hide the truth. Then he explained something no contract could ever predict. He described family not as paperwork but as daily choices. Family meant sitting through frightening medical appointments. Family meant celebrating tiny improvements. Family meant sacrificing convenience because someone else's future mattered more than your comfort. The courtroom became unusually quiet. Clara listened with tears she had spent years refusing to shed. The judge postponed his decision for several days. Those days felt endless. Hazel sensed the tension despite every attempt to protect her. One sunny afternoon she handed Rowan a folded drawing. It showed the three of them standing outside a repaired house beneath a huge tree filled with birds. Above them she had written, in uneven handwriting, "Families are built, not found." Rowan stared at the picture long after Hazel returned to coloring. He realized something had quietly transformed inside him. He no longer wanted 6 months. He wanted every ordinary morning that might come afterward. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, he acknowledged that while the marriage had unconventional beginnings, overwhelming evidence showed genuine care, stability, and commitment to the child's well-being. The challenge was dismissed. The trust funds were immediately released. Within weeks, Hazel underwent the long-awaited surgery. The hours outside the operating room stretched like years. Clara paced endlessly beneath bright hospital windows while Rowan sat silently holding the small sketchbook Hazel had forgotten to pack. When the surgeon finally emerged wearing a relieved smile, both adults stood before hearing a single word. The operation had been successful. Recovery would take time. But Hazel would have the future everyone feared she might lose. Clara broke into tears unlike any Rowan had ever witnessed. They were not tears of fear anymore. They were the tears of someone who had carried impossible burdens for far too long and finally allowed herself to believe tomorrow existed. Recovery brought new beginnings. Hazel returned to school. She played outside for longer than ever before. She laughed without stopping to catch her breath every few minutes. Life slowly became wonderfully ordinary. Then the calendar reached the final week of their agreement. The divorce papers waited and signed on the kitchen table. Neither Rowan nor Clara mentioned them. One warm afternoon, while repairing a garden fence together under bright sunshine, Rowan finally admitted the truth he had spent weeks trying to ignore. Somewhere between hospital visits, shared responsibilities, quiet breakfasts, and hopeful tomorrows, the temporary promise had become the most genuine relationship he had ever known. Clara confessed she had been terrified to feel the same because she believed gratitude might be disguising itself as love. Yet every time she imagined leaving, the future suddenly felt empty instead of free. Neither needed dramatic speeches. Their lives had already spoken. The divorce papers remained untouched. Several months later, beneath the same clear afternoon sky where flowers now surrounded the home they had built together, Rowan asked Clara to marry him again. This time there was no agreement. No deadline. No legal condition. Only love that had quietly earned its place through patience, sacrifice, honesty, and unwavering kindness. Hazel stood beside them holding the very first drawing she had made of the house with sunlight pouring through every window. She smiled and whispered that she finally understood why every picture she drew always needed three people standing together. Before we reach the end of this story, tell us in the comments, have you ever seen kindness between strangers grow into something life-changing, or do you believe that real family is created through love rather than blood? Your words may encourage someone who needs hope today. Years later, visitors often admired the beautifully restored house on the corner filled with flowers and laughter. Few knew its strongest foundation had never been wood or stone. It had been built from one impossible request, one courageous decision, and two hearts willing to believe that even the most unusual beginning could lead to the most beautiful ending. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that some of life's greatest miracles do not begin with perfect plans. They begin with ordinary people choosing compassion when walking away would have been easier, proving that hope, forgiveness, and love often arrive in the most unexpected ways.